All right. So Zach, CBS came out and they put their conference rankings to start the year. Now, I don't think it's very surprising that they would put the SEC first and then come in with the Big Ten after that. I do think it's a little interesting that they did that after they ditched the SEC for the Big Ten in television. But hey, they're being honest, so good for them. And then they have the Big 12, the ACC, the American, Mountain West, Sun Belt, Conference USA, and MAC. I don't know if we need to go too deep into the G5. If you really want to, we can, Zach. But at this point, I'm focused more on the Big Ten and the SEC. I do think the Big 12 was probably third. Now, if the ACC, if Florida State ends up being much better this year than maybe some people are giving credit for, maybe you put the ACC up there. I don't know if the Big 12 has top end teams like the ACC might, but if we're just talking about the Big 12 and the SEC, how big of a gap do you feel like there is between the Big Ten and the SEC?
Uh, I don't know if it's like razor thin, but it's not big for sure. Like I think probably the biggest difference is the amount of playoff caliber teams at this point. And even that, I think the SEC had a pretty good draw. Like I think Missouri and Ole Miss both they could win each 10 or 11 games with a pretty like soft schedule and they're going to get the SEC benefit of the doubt and probably make the playoff. Whereas you look at I think the only team like that in the Big 10 is Iowa. And Iowa might have a huge quarterback problem. So I think at the top, I would argue that there are 4, maybe 5 teams that are playoff caliber that might actually do something in the playoff, whereas I think the SEC has a couple more. But then I look at the floor of both leagues. I would actually argue that the mid tier and lower tier of the Big Ten is rising above some of the lower tier of the SEC. Like I would, I might take every team in the Big Ten over Vandy, and I would include UCLA in that because I think UCLA's got some talent. They just have a
Yeah.
brutal schedule.
I mean, I almost take almost every single team in the Big Ten, maybe not Michigan State, maybe not Purdue. I take almost all of them over over Mississippi State as well.
Yeah, yeah,
I mean, Mississippi State's going to be a dumpster fire this year. I
yeah,
mean, Lebby has his work cut out for him. I believe in Lebby. I think Lebby's a good coach, and I think that he'll get Mississippi State humming at some point. I mean, humming for Mississippi State. I'm not saying they're going to be back
yeah,
to number one in the college
yeah,
football playoffs again, but
yeah.
I think they'll be up there again. Sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
No, no. I mean, I think that's the big thing though. Is I think the floor is rising in the Big Ten, but you don't have like US. I think if the Big Ten were to really compete with the SEC, you need USC to be better. Michigan lost a lot, and so while we'll talk about game by game later. I think Michigan's going to be really good this year, despite all the losses. I don't know if they have the depth to compete, particularly in a long playoff run. I have my concerns about Penn State. I think Iowa can make a playoff, but I don't think they can win a game in the playoff. And I think Ole Miss and Missouri can. So I think that's where I might like draw the line is I think you clearly have 2 of the 4 or 5 best teams in Ohio State and Oregon, at least from a roster perspective. After that, I think the SEC is probably a little better at the top.
I think they're a little better at the top. I do think, Georgia, Alabama, Ole Miss, LSU, some of those teams are hard to beat. I'm sure leaving somebody out. Texas, I'm forgetting about them. Oklahoma, we'll see what they are this season, but
Yeah.
they could be up there at the top too. I think they have a really hard schedule, so they might be like
Yeah.
8-4, 7-5. That might be one of those ones where it's like, don't look at the record. They're actually a much better team than what their record indicates.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I'm with you. I don't think there's any more than probably 4 or 5 teams in the SEC who can win a playoff game unless they just get the right matchup, i.e., like one of the group of 5 teams.
Yeah.
But I think you have 4, possibly 5 teams. If Iowa gets the right matchup, I think they possibly could win a playoff game. But I totally think Ohio State, Oregon, Michigan, Penn State, all those teams can win playoff games. I don't know if they're all going to be able to get in the national championship or not, but I
Yeah.
mean, Michigan just won the national championship last year, so I mean, they have a brand new coach and everything, but still, like,
Yep.
you have got teams that can win that. So, Yankee says here, he says, "I'm no expert on low end SEC." Boy, that would be quite the title, low end SEC expert. Uh, but is there an MSU, Northwestern, Indiana, Purdue in the SEC? Those teams are really, really bad. I would say, and you add to any if you think there are, Zach, but Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and Arkansas would kind of be on the level for them.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's others. I'll push a little bit, Yankee. I think Purdue is gonna be like I think they might be a 4-8 team, and actually think they're actually kind of decent this year. Like I think they're gonna give a lot of teams problems. Like as much as a 4-8 team can.
I was gonna say, I think they're a better team than what their record will indicate as well, but they
Yeah.
have a really tough schedule too.
Yeah.
So
Auburn's a question mark as well.
yeah,
Like they got bulldozed by Maryland in the bowl game, and Maryland, like they didn't have Tunga Vailoa, like
right.
they did not have the season they thought they would, and they just got boat raced by him.
Yeah, I mean, and they stayed relatively together well too. I mean, Hugh Freeze is over there, and people rave about how great of a coach Hugh Freeze is. Which, by the way, did you catch him talking about Alabama? Everybody gives crap to Big Ten coaches when they say, "Oh, we should have won this game, we should have won that game," but Hugh Freeze is out here saying, "Oh, I should have 3 wins against Nick Saban and Alabama." It's like, well, guess what, Hugh, you don't. So. Stop making excuses or whatever about it. You didn't have wins against them, so no, you shouldn't have 3 wins against Nick Saban.
Could you imagine if Ryan Day came out and said that
Oh my
against?
gosh.
Like he would get run out of Columbus. Like
Man,
today.
he said all he said at Big Ten Media Days was we should have won the game against Michigan, but we didn't. I mean, he ended it that way. He was like, but we didn't.
Yeah.
And I mean, Michigan fans raked him over the coals, which at the end of the day, you probably shouldn't say like, oh, we should have won the game. I do think it's a little bit different when at the end you say, but we didn't. But still, like,
Yeah.
Hugh Freeze gets a pass because he's over at Auburn. But anyway, I mean,
do they even play football at Auburn? Seriously,
not unless they have Cam Newton. They don't. Only if they have Cam Newton do they play football over at Auburn. So, Philip with a good comment here. He says, Big Ten versus SEC challenge in football. Who plays who and who wins in the end? This would be really, really difficult to go through. And unfortunately, I didn't prepare for this. But Zach, we'll just go off a few, maybe off the top of our heads. Some teams that I think are kind of similar. Obviously, Ohio State, Georgia. I think either team could win that one. Yeah. Obviously, right now, Georgia's ahead of them in the AP poll, but we saw 2022. That was a very close game. Either one could have won that game. Yeah. So I think that one's kind of a wash, right?
Yeah, I would agree. Then you have Texas, Oregon.
Yeah, that's kind of a wash, too, because they're, 4, and Oregon's 3?
3 and 4. 3 and 4.
Yeah. So that one's a wash, too. The next one, I guess, would be Penn State, Alabama.
Yeah, I would be inclined to pick Alabama in that one.
Yeah, me too. But Michigan, Ole Miss.
I'd probably pick Michigan. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. LSU. Well, we're going to see this one. LSU and USC.
I'm not going to say because
I was going to say we shouldn't give away our game by game predictions, should we? I'll give away my thought. Yeah. It doesn't necessarily mean I think LSU probably edges that one out, but I don't think it's as much of a given as maybe some SEC teams would say. USC still has a good chance there.
Yeah. I'm picking USC at least on my show. And the reason I think it's going to be hard for LSU to replace all that they lost on offense. And I think their defense is trash.
LSU?
Yeah.
They did get that defensive coordinator from Missouri, so that could help fix things, but it's going to be really hard to do that within just one offseason.
Yeah. So, I think it's funny. LSU and USC have similar problems, but.
Yeah, they do. Casual Big Ten says, Michigan is beating Texas week 2, so ... There you go. It's going to happen. Kent said it, so it's going to happen. All right, so let's do a couple more here, and then we'll move on. We don't have time to go through this entire thing. Another team that's probably up there is Tennessee, is who I would probably say is next, right? Yeah. Tennessee and I don't know. I'm just trying to think through power rankings.
Iowa.
Iowa.
And Tennessee beat them 35-0 last year.
I'm sorry. Missouri. I just looked them up.
Missouri.
Missouri versus Iowa. I think Missouri probably wins that one.
Yeah.
Tennessee versus who's next in the power? Wisconsin. I like Wisconsin's chances better. I think they have a better offense than Iowa does, so I like their chances better.
Yeah, maybe that's a tough one. I would probably call it a toss-up, but
yeah.
Are they playing in Camp Randall? That's the real question.
That's true. Washington and Oklahoma? Question mark?
Oh, Oklahoma.
You think so?
Oh, yeah.
Who's after Washington in the Big Ten? Is it Maryland? UCLA?
It would maybe Minnesota.
I probably think Minnesota. Yes, I'm forgetting Minnesota. Minnesota versus. Let's see who was next in the standings.
Oh no, it's Rutgers.
A&M.
Rutgers.
Oh, Rutgers versus Texas A&M. Elko versus Shiano. Boy, that would be a great matchup. I would love to see that game.
That actually would be really fun. Elko. We also forgot Nebraska also.
Did we though? There haven't been no bowl game in 7 years.
We just invited the common fan people to the podcast, and we just.
I know. I didn't feel like breaking their hearts when they were on the podcast, so maybe they're not listening this time.
TJ is just he's queuing up a new Godfather reference now.
He's got a Godfather reference for me. All right, so let's end on this question. Philip, good question. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through every single team, but I appreciate you. Well, we might make that a segment at some point. So let me ask you this, Zach. What does the Big Ten have to do? Like, let's say this season. This season is the year that the Big Ten nationally is recognized as the better conference in the SEC. What would the Big Ten have to do this season in order for that to happen?
Well, don't lose the dumb non-conference games. Like,
amen.
Right. Like, I'm looking at you, PJ Fleck. It's like, oh, we're going to just putz around and lose to Bowling Green again. Good job.
They beat Bowling Green in the bowl game, didn't they?
Yeah, but I'm talking when it actually mattered in 2021, when they were like, could have gotten to 10 or 11 wins, and instead they blew it. They did beat in bowl game. But like Nebraska has to beat Colorado.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I would say like Minnesota has to beat North Carolina without Drake May. Northwestern has to beat Miami of Ohio. UCLA has to beat Hawaii. Like, it's the games that either the toss-up, I think both the toss-ups and also the ones where you're like, they have to win at least over 50% of the toss-ups, and they have to win the ones that they're supposed to win.
Right. So, I mean, Penn State has to beat West Virginia.
Yes. Which is not
Iowa,
a given.
It's not a given. I think, I obviously lean Penn State, but you're right. It's not a given. Iowa has to beat Iowa State.
Yep.
Oregon has to beat Oregon State. That's going to happen. Rutgers needs to beat Virginia Tech. I know Virginia Tech returns a bunch of players, but Rutgers needs to beat them.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois can't get blown out by Kansas again.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to at least be competitive in that one. I know Kansas is a Big 12 contender, but you have to at least be competitive. Maryland has to beat Virginia. Michigan State has to beat Boston College.
Yeah.
Northwestern has to beat Duke. There you go. Casual Big Ten. There's your battle of the brains for you. Northwestern versus Duke. Apparently they play a ton. I looked them up on Winsipedia the other day. They play a ton. I don't know why Northwestern and Duke is a thing, but let's see. I mean, Purdue has to beat Oregon State, right? They don't need to beat Notre Dame, but they need to beat Oregon State.
Yeah.
So
upset against Notre Dame would be nice.
All right. Friend Mike here, Alibaba. This guy forgets that PJ Fleck had a great out-of-conference record overall, including an undefeated bowl record. Agree with you that Minnesota needs to beat, and I believe they will beat UNC this year. We'll get to that prediction here soon, but I think that a Drake Mayless UNC team, there is a very good chance there. So
I hold on to a lot of bitterness for that Bowling Green upset. I'm sorry. I'm probably speaking out of turn there.
My emotions are getting the best of me. All right. Anything else on this subject? I mean, I think one more thing. If the Big Ten gets two teams the national championship again, I mean, you can't say
really
they're the best conference,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's when everybody exploded about the SEC, is when Georgia and Alabama got there together, which, I mean, everybody considered them before that, but still, like, you have back-to-back years, Michigan, Washington, and then you do it with two different teams the next
Yeah,
year, Ohio State and Oregon, Penn State. I don't know, like somebody like that.
yeah,
I think you have to consider them the best. Penn State,
yeah.
Michigan. I don't know.
I mean, I think it's possible you get Ohio State, Oregon multiple times in the season. I think you could get Ohio State, Michigan.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, I think either way. The thing about the Big Ten and the narrative is you have to do it multiple times. Like I think that
yeah,
was like the SEC. It wasn't just. I mean, 2017 really solidified it, but it was like every year, and I think even the Bama dynasty, they would keep saying, "Well, Saban's dead." After 2014, the Bama dynasty's dead, and what happens? They kill everybody the next season. So um, I think it's got to be longevity, not just a one-off.
yeah. I mean, it definitely has to be longevity. But if it was gonna happen like this very next season,
Yeah,
two teams in the national championship and
that'd be
win,
huge.
yeah, win the non-conference games you're supposed to win.